Okay, so and now I sort of work on these things. It depends on the creature or the figure itself, but this was something I sort of left the head till the end, and I think that I just really wanted to know and have the palette established really well before I got into noodling around with the head. I did change the drawing, the position of this head just slightly from what the Dragonary pencil drawing was, the initial concept drawing. Um, but this guy, now we have the palette worked out. The horns are going to be darker. The snout is going to be darker, and of course, the you know the most around the eyes and things like that, we're going to have some lighter greens. And again, I've talked about this before too, but there's usually, like for me, there's a subject within a subject on these paintings. So by that I mean it's not just the entire dragon itself that's the subject. It's really the head and this upper, maybe this forearm and shoulder area there. That's the subject. So I'm making a conscious choice to have that back leg and the arm that's in the back have a lot less detail to them, so that he has a dimension to them, to himself. So that's something that I'm always aware of in a piece. No matter how complicated the painting gets, I do generally in my mind break it up into like a background, middle ground, subject sort of area kind of breakdown. So I don't know if that helps anybody else think in that way, but I've always found that it's a device to help really put a little extra punch and focus on your main element where you really want the viewer to look. And again, this here is just a lot of kind of back and forth. I'll tweak it in for a little while and then dust it down, go back in and pop in some more crisp edges and then dust them down. It's just a back and forth until you come up with what you're happy with. Sometimes you get lucky and it looks looks great right away. Sometimes it takes a little more persuasion to get there. That's part of the unpredictability of art. It's not like doing some things where the progress is predictable. After 30 years of doing this, I feel like I'm pretty predictable, but there's always still just some things that come out easier than others. Now, I hadn't dealt with the eye at this point either. I do have I like to use complements when I can, even if I have to neutralize them a little bit to give a little boost of color. If I feel that something's looking too monochromatic or like it doesn't have enough in nature, even something's local color, if it's for example green, it usually has a lot of other colors in it. It's not just a straight string of green. So a lot of times if you use a complement, you're on the other side of the color wheel and it all of a sudden really gives it a full palette feel, even though the piece is not a full palette painting. So that's just something I do. I think it comes from my years of doing illustration. But the reason I bring that up is at this point, the eye is just the underpainting still. And I was thinking I was going to go with like a reddish eye, which I do quite a bit though too, I've noticed. So you'll see how that turns out. But with the red being the complement of green, it would be sort of a natural choice for me. Now at this point, I'm definitely in there with a round. These when I'm in here around the eye and stuff like that, these are the tiny brushes, and at this point, if I'm in there with something that small, it means that I'm pretty happy with the head and we're really just in here trying to peck away at some detail. But again, I'm looking for some real finish around the eye, the little pops of the highest highlight, that greenish yellow around the eye. And again, they're on that shoulder and stuff too, which is, for me, again, this kind of the real subject of this thing. He definitely has a little bit of a dinosaur influence in the face, and that horn on the head, reminds me of reminds me of a Triceratops a little bit. I mean, a modified one, probably. I mean, I know I refer to that. I oversimplify my dinosaur types. Now this rock, again, we had laid this in and got it knocked down to the point where it looked like a painting. But now that I really have these greens in here, the thing, I like the way this rock turned out, but for me, it was the challenge here was that it's a bridge between that real pale, super, blown out background and the more detailed, realized almost full value, almost goes to black in the foreground. So this was really the bridge for that, not both in value and in the color choices, using that yellow green in here. It just really helped. It's a kind of weird that you have an element like this that I look at as not being a really super important element in the piece, but yet it really is in how it helps bridge the color and the value and ground that otherwise I think the foreground would have looked really cut out against such a high key background. So I thought this rock turned out pretty well. And it's funny how, things like that, like this rock, for example, will be something that I really enjoy about the painting. I don't know if anybody else ever notices those things, but for me, the successes are usually tied to some kind of a technical achievement, as it is in this case. And of course, and we're really in here on this. I mean, this is the painting itself was 8.5 by 11 inches. So this is a little bigger if depending on what kind of screen you're viewing this on. We're zoomed in here pretty good. And again, like on this is probably a filbert. The filberts I really like for the texture for painting this kind of thing. And again, I'm always flipping things on their side or upside down or just whatever. I've said it a million times and I'll say it a million more times, but it helps with the brush direction, both of what you're seeing and what you're laying down. And then once I have that middle ground rock that's really going to show me how to finish this foreground rock. Okay, now, at this point, we're really, you can see that background rock and even the distant background is looking pretty good. There's a lot about the dragon himself that I like, but there's also a few things, especially in and around on that back area that I still think, I can see some things now. I can see kind of how I want to move forward with it, but I don't consider them to be finished yet. So here, at this point on this foreground hand here, or the more forward of the two arms, up until this point, we were just looking at a lot of underpainting, some washes and things like that. But now we're really getting in here and starting to noodle this hand into finish. So again, it's something that because of the direction of some of the scales and the patterns on the arm there, it was nice to lay on its side. It gives me sort of the ability to create little rhythms with the brush strokes that I'm making, and it can kind of feel like little scales and stuff. And you'll see how that builds here, especially on that foreground as this moves forward. But again, at this point, I have several strings of green, one that gets a little bluer in the highlight and one that gets a little more of like a raw sienna in the highlight that you can see like on the highlights on the hand right now. And I have that stuff on the palette from painting the rest of the body, the back leg and the head and everything. So I'm not struggling with the palette at all at this point. It's just a matter of trying to arbitrarily pop some of those colors around so that it doesn't feel like just the hand is painted with one palette and then, it changed or something like that. It should feel natural, and there can be quite a bit of variation in the color. But it should sort of feel like, it appears randomly, even though, I mean, we try and make it seem random. That's the fight, I guess. Nature does that so well, and we try and make the patterns feel random, but sometimes they can feel a little man-made. Now that's the real challenge in painting natural subjects to me. But that's another reason why I like to take advantage of things like flipping the palette, because there is sort of a natural rhythm that you can create by almost the sketch-like brush strokes that you can create with a paintbrush. At this point also, and I do this on most of the time when I paint, is I really stay away from the darker darks until the end, because the darks on the palette tend to be of one family. They tend to be kind of either blue or red, and it can sap some of the color out of the color string that you're using by integrating it into your middle tones too early. So that's something else that you'll start to see now that this arm here is, I'm really getting down to finish. I'll start to really pop in some things that are almost black, although I don't think I used any black at all in this piece. I do tend to mix my own black with like violet, burnt umber, phthalo blue, maybe a little alizarin crimson. And you come out with this kind of dark purplish brown mud. But it's a black that has color to it, more so than like ivory black out of the tube. And when, not that I'm doing these pieces specifically for reproduction, but in illustration, that color that I just described will print as black. I mean, everything always prints a little darker than you paint it. So that's kind of something to keep in mind for that application. But I know that's the reason why I do it too. That's the reason why I've developed that particular quirk over the years, not to put a lot of black in until the end. And then again, this is just more noodling away, trying to see, what this suggests now to me. I can see sort of the tendons in his hand. So you're pulling those out a little bit. To me, the piece is looking really good. So it's about what does it need to kind of drag it across the finish line. Some things will suggest that they just need a little more information. One of the things that was kind of bugging me here, which you can see right now, and I'm going to knock it out here as this moves forward, but the upper part of the back has like a bluer highlight than the more yellow highlight that the arm and the head have right now. So I'm going to start to take those highlights that I have and work them into the upper body also. And the other thing about those colors, as opposed to the darker and more middle tone greens, is that they're far more opaque. The darker greens and stuff like that tend to be a lot more transparent. So this is really the higher highlights with the yellows and the greens together. They really are an opaque color that's going to really be bold as you lay it into this. And again, I don't know if all this was done in the one sitting since I put the liquid glaze down, but if it wasn't, I would have just laid down another clear coat of glaze or medium over top of wherever this was when I started the next day. I have a feeling this was probably a few sittings. And again, this is all just kind of little detail. And you'll see here, again, with the dark I was talking about, this is just little linear darks, real drawn accents. Most of the hand, as far as where we started, the hand was much smaller in the drawing. I know we corrected that in the digital underpainting, but all of that kind of stuff is sort of worked out at this point. So now we're really just down to, if you got your nose up to this painting, these are the little details you're gonna see. Definitely using a small round here, number 2 round. Okay, so here's what I was talking about a minute ago, where I see some secondary little forms here, and I wanted to pull some of them out, and also incorporate some of the yellow color in this a little more. You notice I just obliterated one of the spikes too. I was also looking at the pattern that I had created with the spikes running down the back, and I'm trying to be aware of that also. So there was one of those there that was kind of bugging me, so I just knocked it out. And again, at this point, the paint is the paint I'm using is very opaque. So, I mean, doing that kind of stuff is no problem. But you can see now, like I can see as I look over the head, the elbow, and up in that area the back that I'm working now, there are different little variations of green that we were talking about before. And I think it really lends a real natural quality to this little character. I don't even know if he's little. One of the things I did stay away from in this piece, I had thought about putting in something else that would give away the scale of him. It could be something like a squirrel or something else that you would have a known size for. There isn't really anything like that in this piece. Both the water and the rocks, the environment, they could be, this guy could be the size of a frog, or he could be the size of a rhinoceros. So I ultimately decided to stay away from that and just let the viewer make that choice. But it was something that I played around with in my mind a little bit as I was working on the background composition initially, whether I would put something like that in here. And I chose not to on this guy, but I definitely will on some of the future ones, and have them sort of interacting with real animals. I think that could be a neat angle too. But again, you can see here, I've talked about it a few times in this video, the secondary sort of little round bulbous shapes on that back. And now you can kind of see them really, really starting to develop. It took a few passes before I could really see the direction it was going in. And of course, I could have sculpted this guy and tried something like that would have given me some of that information. I didn't go that way with this because I had such a refined drawing. I had spent quite a bit of time with that. And the light was not overly complicated. It was just sort of an overcast light from the top. So, which is kind of how I tend to draw things anyway. So I just didn't feel like I needed the extra boost of reference. It probably would have sped this up a little bit. I'll say that, but I don't mind the process. So I think it all worked out okay. And again, just dusting this down, but you can start to see now, like this guy's really starting to look pretty good. There's some details in the horns and the spikes and things that we'll need to add, but as far as the green, the arm, the areas that are green in the belly, it looks pretty good. There may be a few accent darks that get added or something like that, but the form has come a long way. And at this point, I have the darks on the palette, so I'm able to just go around the edges of those little spikes now and just kind of clean up any little edges that bother me, and sort of get them set up to just have some highlights placed on them, on those horns, and they'll basically be done. So things are, moving along and progressing as we had hoped. But one of the things I'm noticing as I'm looking at this piece, it's sitting on its side here, is you can see how painterly the rocks look right now, compared to what they started out looking like with the digital underpainting. And we just blew that away. I mean, I can't stress enough that it's really your choice to let these things be as loose or as, painterly as you want them to be, or as tight as you want them to be, or as influenced by the underpainting, or, for you to take it away from that underpainting. I mean, that's your choice. And, we have a lot of freedom. And, my method of working is just, it's a way that I've developed for myself over the years that seems to create the least amount of problems for me. It's sort of, the process is developed because it's the way I sort of think and develop a piece naturally, as far as the lay-ins and just the way the thing comes to finish. But there certainly are no hard and fast rules. I I'm sure I have the value study of this off to the side that I'm looking at, and sometimes I feel like I'm trying to copy myself when I do that, and I try and be aware of that, and by that I mean that if something starts to look a little different but looks okay, I think that's fine. You know, I don't have to get caught up in trying to copy um, the study that I did in Photoshop. It is a guide, but it's not the end all be all to this process. So, you know, I want to feel like I have some freedom to let some things happen. You know, happy accidents, as Bob Ross used to say. And so again, we're just pecking around the detail a little bit, but I wanted to also like mention, I had talked about this before, but the back legs, just how they're left in silhouette. You can see a little bit of that even on the back of the top of the guy just a second ago, but it pushes it back behind that elbow. And now we're really getting in here now, because I'm starting to use these little blue highlights and that are going to give this kind of a brownish black color to these little spikes. So I'm just kind of going around, laying in some paint, and then I'm going to get in here and noodle these guys a little bit, dust them down. But again, at this point, this is all looking pretty good. And this is really just, I mean, it's just putting in the time and the detail and getting the little things in. Which, I mean, this phase always comes, and it is the slower part of it, but you know, it's why we save it to the point where, you know, we know what the palette is, we know what the composition is, so that the time here isn't wasted. And then painting these little black spikes, you know, the highlights are very controlled on them. They're very minimal, just little beacons of highlight to give it kind of a shiny black texture. So again, you know, even though we're going in here and noodling these things, we're not repainting them by any sense. It's just a little bit of a highlight on it. And I do have the darks on the palette too that I can work back in order to beat that highlight back a little bit if it gets a little too crazy. I talked about the eye before also, and at this point, I think I did go in and paint this in, but I had painted it in the color that it was in the underpainting, so it gave it this kind of, you know, golden sepia color. But I found that I think that is less distracting than if I would have made it like a chromatic red. I did do a few red eyes in this series, so I think I decided to give this to go a little bit different way with this particular guy. But I still think the warmer tones look good and really help give it a full palette feel. Yeah, and then these are just a little details. This guy doesn't have a lot as far as teeth or anything like that, so there wasn't really anything like that to deal with. This is just a matter of really trying to heighten everything. You know, it's a back and forth that I sort of play with myself as to how finished, you know, or how much of the highest highlight I can get. You know, I don't want to kill the whole thing with it. I want those highlights to have some purpose and some impact. So at this point too, I mean, the video goes kind of straight through, but I do spend a little more time stopping to look at the thing and just kind of think about it. You know, I'm not moving as constantly as the video makes it appear, especially when it comes down to the finish work like this. And now there are some of those real nice, like wet highlights right around the eye again that I was talking about. You know, you're almost saving those for the end. Too much of that at the beginning, and you know, the color would look blown out. There's that eye color. It's sort of like a Mars orange, sienna, burnt sienna. But again, I think I just decided that less was more on this particular eye instead of turning it into something more complicated with an iris and all this kind of thing. I just decided to keep it simple. The character is complicated enough with all the spikes and the scales and the change of the color. You have the dark spikes, the green, and the belly color. So I think I just decided to play it simple on the eye. Sometimes you have enough ingredients. Now, even though, I did mention the painterly quality of the rocks, the rocks were still pretty much just the lay-in. There was one pass on them and everything was kind of beat down and blocked in. So I did want to go in and just add a little bit of smaller brushwork detail, but I also wanted to take that opportunity to punch up the chroma on some of these colors a little bit. When you're laying in broad strokes and kind of using colors that are on the palette, sometimes things will tend to get a little bit muddy just because you're mixing all these colors together. So this is an opportunity now. You can see where as I go in and paint the water, it's just a little bit bluer, in its chrome and in saturation. It's punched up a little bit from where it was in the first pass. And I don't want to go crazy with this. I don't want, cobalt blue water in here. It's still a painting about grays, about a lot of neutrality. Except for probably the green, almost everything is a neutral version of itself. So, I wanted to keep that in mind. But my value and that kind of stuff was pretty close in the lay-in. So it was just a matter of, adding a little extra color, a little extra accent color in there. And the fact that we had some of the blue light coming off the top of the rocks that you can see, not coming off the top of the rocks, but hitting the top of the rocks. Some of this color that you can see there around the hand, that led me to think that I could get away with something pretty blue in this water, and it would still feel like white. Wouldn't feel like blue. I love painting these natural elements like this too. The waterfalls, rocks, and things like that. They seem somehow cathartic to paint. There's a lot of different approaches to them. How tight you want to make them. I mean, it's a completely stylistic and personal choice. But I just always have a good time working on these rocks. Now, with not just these rocks, but rocks in general. But these were ones now that I looked back at my reference, looked at my rock in the background there again too, and it was a matter of trying to give it a similar texture and kind of aesthetic as to what that rock has in the background. So a little bit of moss, a couple of little wet highlights and things like that it would have from being around this this sort of wet area. The green at this point is almost an arbitrary color in the rocks just to bring some of the green down into that area. But there, I mean, you can see it just is a couple little brush strokes, and it, we talked about earlier in this video, sometimes something will lay in and be more close to finish than you realize. And, these rocks were certainly one of those things. It was just a few little highlights like this on top of it, on top of the lay-in, and it was a done deal. I thought they turned out really well. But overall, I think this piece turned out great. It was a lot of fun to paint, and I got to explore a few different things, and I think it's exciting. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post them. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening, and if you've gotten this far, please consider joining my Patreon if you haven't already. There are 3 options in joining my Patreon: the Red Drake tier, which has exclusive Patreon supporter-only content, the Silver Wyvern tier, which has exclusive content as well as an art print of that month's dragon art, and the Gold Dragon tier, which includes video critiques of your work. I hope you'll join this Dragon Lovers community where I'll be sharing many insightful tips to hopefully improve your dragon art making abilities. Thank you again. We'll see you next time.